Uncle, help me up! Come on! Uncle, please! Uncle! Uncle! Brains! You must have lots of brains to subscribe to Geek Legion of Doom!
Directed and written by Andrzej Berry II, we are talking Necropolis. Now, there's actually been a few movies called Necropolis. This is a 2026 zombie-style film. And it's a very low-budget movie. I believe it was filmed in Georgia. So, we have a situation where there has been some type of, zombie-style virus outbreak. And the movie follows primarily two people. An ex-military guy who's been given the task of looking after this young boy who might have the key in his DNA to, be the vaccine for this kind of virus. And there is a kind of remnants of like a government which is wanting to get this boy and, exploit this kind of for themselves. So it follows them as they traverse the landscape looking for this particular area which is meant to be a safe haven. Along the way they all meet different people, some friends, some foes, and of course lots of zombies, or in this case they're called lurkers. What will happen? You'll have to watch the movie and find out. So let's discuss. So this is a very low budget movie, so we do have to have the expectations in place about what a movie around this kind of budget, I think it's around $10,000 I want to say, what it can actually do. What's the plus, what's the upswing here, what works well? For the budget, the movie has scope. There's actually quite a large cast in this movie. We have a variety of different kind of characters that we kind of meet. It almost feels like a kind of condensed version of The Walking Dead in many ways. We meet different characters and they weave in and out of the plot. So there's obviously, a large cast here, obviously. So a lot of this budget I would have gone to some of these kind of, these extras and these kind of small supporting roles and things like that. But it does give the movie a sense of the, more of a broad look at this kind of like this zombie apocalypse. I also think the element here of this sort of a still somewhat functioning government is an interesting idea, where they are sort of putting out sort of misinformation and things. So I guess you could say maybe this is early in a kind of a zombie apocalypse, so there is still the sort of going on, or is local government and stuff, which I thought was interesting, a little different maybe from the majority of obviously kind of zombie films that you'll see here. And they end up being somewhat of an antagonistic force. But I thought it was an interesting thing. I think the main strength of this movie, however, is the kind of the relationship between our two central characters. And they have this kind of surrogate father-son relationship that kind of builds through the movie. And I just actually quite like some of the quieter moments. For example, our main protagonist is this kind of ex-military guy, and for example, he's teaching this young boy how to play chess, for the reason being that he's trying to teach him to think more strategically and stuff like that. So there's this kind of little elements here that I just thought were kind of interesting, and he's kind of prepping this boy to become to be able to survive in this kind of landscape by doing these kind of various sort of tasks. A lot of it is, how to shoot a gun and all the rest of it. But I like some of the idea here about how they're, that more the subtle ways that he kind of does it and stuff. And I just thought the kind of relationship between these two characters was pretty strong and kind of give the movie some heart. And I know there's been a little bit of, not that I play video games, but it's been a particular video game which is meant to be promoting fatherhood. Again, I've just seen it in the kind of the press. I haven't played it. I don't really play video games anymore. So it seems to be a thing. And there have been, of course, other film properties, Lone Wolf and Cub, The Mandalorian, which has had this kind of theme of, a kind of a protector looking after this kind of younger sort of child and stuff like that. So it's something that which has been obviously quite popular. And I kind of like the way this, as I say, this movie does this in a, somewhat of a more subtle way, a little bit, it's not quite pedal to the metal, to be honest. The movie is punctuated with a variety of kind of action sequences. I mean, look, it's a very low budget movie. The kind of the technical elements here is certainly limited, but I think the movie has sort of enough sort of conflict and action and things like that in the movie to kind of sort of keep you interested to a point. But what do I say to a point? Which leads me to, I think, maybe the biggest issue with this movie is it's just too long. I mean, it's not a especially long film, but it's over 2 hours. And there's a lot of fat that could have been trimmed off this movie to make it a leaner movie. To give you an example, but this is just one example of that I think that could have been changed. So earlier on in the movie, our sort of duo of protagonists meet these two women, and they offer them shelter and a meal, so they kind of go back to where they're living. And I thought, are these women going to be like cannibals because they're sort of cooking meat and stuff? And I thought, are they going to try and eat them? Is this going to be like a challenge? No, they just end up leaving. And I thought, what was the point of that scene, of those scenes? Because they didn't amount to anything, and it just kind of like filled out the runtime. And there's plenty of scenes like this where you just feel the movie has it needed more a producer, quite frankly, to come in and kind of go, this needs to be a leaner movie, because it ends up having a lot of sort of scenes that were somewhat not exactly conducive to a thrilling narrative, shall we say. So the movie's pacing suffers because of this, because it just feels a little bit drawn out at times, a little bit sort of slow in places where I think the movie probably had enough going on if you would have cut out 30 to 40 minutes to this and have it a lot leaner movie and a bit more kind of exciting. And you really wouldn't have missed any plot points. But the plot isn't exactly kind of like rocket science here. It's a very similar plot to we've seen in a lot of other kind of zombie movies. There's a few themes of like betrayal and stuff like that, which I thought was interesting. But even with this, I thought there was some plot threads that weren't even resolved and stuff. So yeah, I think that the script here needed to be a little tighter, and it definitely needed to have a producer on board that would kind of like, have a look at this and package it more as a little bit more of a digestible film. So I just think the movie ends up being dull, or at least it has dull parts where I think it necessarily couldn't, it didn't need to have them. It could have been trimmed down. And I think when you have, people who are our main guy, for example, our main actor, he's a producer on the film, and they clearly don't want to cut out their scenes. And I understand that, but obviously this is why you need a producer to kind of make these sort of decisions here and stuff like this. I think some of the mythology is a little bit mixed. I wasn't quite sure of the setup of this movie. Saying that this movie needed to have scenes cut out, I think the movie needed to have a better setup in regards to what's actually kind of happened, because I wasn't sort of quite sure about this, how this is all kind of taking place. And there's talk of this doctor doing these vaccines and what he shouldn't have done, but again, I didn't really think it was a particularly kind of well thought out scenes that really kind of set up this kind of this world that we're kind of living in. So yeah, there's a few elements here where you feel it has a kind of a little bit of an amateurish feel to it, which leads me on to the technical elements. The things that take place in the night. This is obviously what happens when it's dark, but it's hard to see a lot of the time. And yes, you could arguably say it's dark in the night and therefore you can't see, but as when you're watching this as a piece of entertainment, you have to find ways of making the movie lit better so you can kind of see what's going on. I mean, it's not obviously all the time. A lot of this movie takes place during the day, to be honest, but in night scenes I felt there was a little bit underlit at times. So there are a few kind of technical elements here. And I have to be honest with you, I think the acting is a mixed bag overall. Obviously, this is a very low budget movie. And as such, I think some of the performances from different kind of like actors, they range in quality, let's just say, and some of the kind of the some of the choices of the acting here is, little mixed, let me just kind of say that. So again, this definitely ends up having that kind of low budget feel. And the kind of the zombies, or the lurkers as they are called here, I mean, they're just like guys running around. I mean, it's sort of said that they're not dead, but then it's also implied that they are dead, and they come back to life. And it's like, again, the mythology is not exactly clear about what's going on, and then there's not really like particularly kind of like grotesque zombie makeup. It's just like, people with a little bit of like powder on their faces to look a bit pale or whatever, or things like this. It doesn't really look particularly interesting in regards to like VFX and all this, and it's not a particularly like gory film in any way. So it isn't the most exciting zombie film when it all shakes out. I think with an edit it could be a little bit more interesting. As it stands at the moment, I've got to say, I think for most people they might find this a little bit on the kind of the dull side, even though there are some interesting elements, and I think in the movie, and I appreciate the restrictions that a low budget movie can have. And this is what this channel is predicated on. But I think there were choices here that could have been made to make this a more palatable movie overall. I'm going to give it a 4 out of 10. It wasn't a terrible movie, I don't think, but the shortcomings are there to see. What are your thoughts if you've seen it? Leave me a comment and I'll look forward to seeing you next time.
I hear someone might have the Jimmy Smiths.